Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and make what kind of is our statement flower, statement foliage in this cake. I don't have a name for it because it's something that I saw at the garden center. I took a picture, it didn't have a tag, nobody at the garden center knew what it was. I called back later, nobody knew what it was. I sent pictures to 3 or 4 florists. One of them sent pictures to their supplier, nobody knew what it was. I sent pictures to Chef Nicholas, he didn't know what it was. So we're just gonna call it the star leaf and go with that. Okay, so I'm using the Flower Pro Rose Leaf and Rose Leaf Cutter Set, the Ultimate Filler Flower Mold, a rolling pin, a ridge board, a Dresden tool, ball tool, 28 gauge wire cut in quarters, my edible glue, quarter width or half width, sorry, they call it quarter width, but I call it half width, Hamilworth tape, some paintbrushes, one of them being a fine paintbrush, my size guide, a foam pad, and confectioner's glaze, the full strength confectioner's glaze, not the canned stuff. If the canned stuff is what you have, that's totally fine. I would just give it a double coat. I wanted this one to be a shinier looking leaf, so the full strength does really well with that. Some high proof alcohol, Everclear. Okay, so we're gonna get started on this one. My paste has been tinted with, it's kind of a yellowy green, so it's a mix of gooseberry and yellow, gooseberry pro gel. I'm gonna flip my board so that I have the ridge side up. Okay, give my paste a knead. My fingers are starting to turn green, and it's not from gardening, it's from making so much foliage. I am turning green from dusting and taping and glazing and all kinds of stuff. So I'm gonna roll it into a sausage to start, and then I'm gonna press. I have 5 ridges in my board. I'm gonna press, I try to always get at least 3 out of it at once. And with the ridge board, you're not gonna lift and move and lift and move. You're gonna roll with it stuck in the ridge, because if you lift it up now, you're gonna lose the ridge that you're making, and you're just gonna smush it, not line it up perfectly. So you're just going up and down to roll out to get your ridges. Okay. I can start to see my ridges coming through. So I'm gonna peel away and flip over. And now I have my channels for my wire. Okay, there's 4 sizes in the rose leaf cutter set. I'm using the smallest 3. I've just left the biggest one out. So this is the bottom, and on the bigger one I'm going to use a little bit more of my ridge. Give it a shake. If it comes off like that, I run my fingers along to make sure I get a nice clean cut. Pop it out. We'll do one of this one. Okay. And one of this one. I'm a big believer of you can use a cutter for multiple purposes. In this case, this is the rose leaf cutter. The leaf that I was looking at is not quite rose leaf shape. It comes a little bit narrower and more pointed at the bottom. So we're just gonna manipulate our petals to do that. So I'm gonna take my edible glue and my 28 gauge wire, dip in the glue, wipe off any excess. I'm gonna hold it between my pointer finger and my thumb and insert the wire. I do that just so I don't feel it coming through on either side. Once I'm in there, I'm going to pull down, just changing the shape of the petal a bit, and bring it to a point. Okay, it just changes the petal shape ever so slightly to give me more of that pointed bottom, which is what these leaves had. Okay. I'll do it with each one. The ones that you've used a little bit more thicker of the ridge, you'll be able to manipulate a little bit more. Okay. And you'll notice I'm holding it with my other hand to secure it to the wire while I'm pulling. I'm not pressing down. The one thing with everything in doing cake decorating or sugar flowers is I find people want to like squeeze. I'm always very gently holding with just almost the pads of my fingers. Okay, stretch. So we have our 3 leaves. I grab our foam pad. Put aside my glue for now. And I'm going to use my ball tool, half on the paste, half on the foam pad. I'm not pushing to give it a ruffle. I'm just softening the edge. This leaf didn't have a lot of that ruffly movement, but I do want to just thin it out a little bit. Okay, and I'm not rolling. Do what works for you. Some people roll. I am just kind of moving it along. My ball tool itself isn't moving in my hand. Okay, do that to all. Now I made, for my original flower, I made, I think in the end, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 or 11 leaves for it. 3 or 4 of each size. Make extra, because just because it worked out the first time that it looked good with 9, depending on the way your leaves dry, you may find you have more of a gap in a place, so you may find you need there to be an extra one on the next one. This was kind of my statement foliage, so I only have one. So on my cake, although once I'm done making all of these sample ones, maybe I'll add another arrangement to my cake. So the ridge that my wire was in goes into the ridge of the back of the veiner, and there's a channel for that wire to stick right out the bottom. Make sure they're good and lined up and press down. Okay, now when it sticks to the mold like this, you don't want to grab by the wire and pull out. You're just going to gently peel it away. Okay, I'm going to use my Dresden tool to just make sure the bottom is defined. Kind of give it a pinch all the way up. But now I want it to dry on my foam pad so that it dries a little bent open. I don't want them to curl in this way. All the petals on this leaf flower all curved back. Okay, so we'll do the other 2. So a couple of each size. Again, the channel for your wire goes into the channel of the veiner. Press down, and peel away. If your mold is brand new, you may find you need to use a little bit of cornstarch or a little bit of shortening. I try my hardest to avoid using when I can, because I don't want to change the consistency of the paste. If I'm going to use anything, my preference is shortening. I find that cornstarch dries things out very fast, but it also can be dependent on what paste you're using. Okay. So you're going to let those dry overnight or in your dehydrator. Put those aside. Now we're also going to make a center. So using a number 4 size ball of paste, I use these little cavities, the smallest one. Okay. A little bit bigger, so it sits a little bit more above the hole. Okay. Made it into a tiniest little teardrop, and I'm going to press it into that mold so a little bit sticks out. Okay. I'm also using my 28 gauge wire, my edible glue. Now, again, you can hook it if that makes you feel more comfortable. There's no weight or anything pushing on what I'm making here, so I don't worry about hooking my wire. Insert and just taper that down. And again, you're gonna want to let that dry overnight or in your dehydrator. Okay, so from there, we're going to get our dust. I'm using the same moss green and aubergine that I used on the succulents, and this was my one that the succulents were kind of accenting my statement flower. So I have my smallest petals and my medium and large petals, two different dusting of them. My small petals only, I'm giving the aubergine. I'm loading a flat brush with color, and on the edges of my petal, I'm starting off and pulling in. This will give the darkest highlight right to the edge of my leaf. Okay. Now making sure you do front and back. If it's not going to be visible, if it's for a client and you're not worried about it being seen, that's one thing. If you're competing, you're always going to want to make sure you do the front and back, or if it's somewhere that's going to be seen. So all my little guys are like that. My big guys and my medium ones are with the moss green the same way. This isn't going to change it a whole lot at first, but when we glaze it, the colors will really pop. Okay, front and back. Don't put your dust away quite yet. We're going to tuck it aside, but we're going to come back to using it when our piece is all together. So I'm just going to put it off to the side for the moment. I have taped down all of my petals except for the two that I just did. And because nothing ever goes quite perfectly as planned, I filmed this once and I didn't like the way the video came out, and now I'm filming it a second time, which means I'm down a few petals. I had made lots extra, but I don't have many big ones. There's my big one. So we're gonna make do with what we have. So I have my flower center. I'm going to tape down all my petals because the start of these petals will be seen. And now I did do it on green wire, so you could choose not to tape them down. But if it's a competition piece or something, I feel like you can tell when it's a naked wire. So if that's something that concerns you or bothers you, then make sure you tape them down ahead of time. So I'm just taping them down 1/2 inch, okay, all my petals. You don't have to do this. If the customer is not paying enough to do this, don't do it. But if it's for a competition piece, make sure you tape down your petals. Okay, so we're gonna start with our center. And I'm just curving these back at the wire because they don't sit tight like this, okay? They don't sit tight to the base of my center. They sit so you can see a little bit of their stem coming away from the center, okay? So if you're comfortable putting on 2 or 3 at a time, go ahead and bend another one out. It starts to look like a fancy golden snitch in the wrong color from Harry Potter. Okay, and making sure when you're taping, you've always stretched your tape. You're taping down on an angle, never straight out so that it doesn't bulk up. Okay, I'm gonna add in a 3rd one of these. Now these wires are very soft because they are 28 gauge wire. You're still gonna wanna be careful with how you're grabbing your petal. I often grab from the side or from the base. I never bend right at the tip. Okay, and now we're gonna start to fill in with some of the medium-sized petals. And it's not going to look exactly, you're gonna wanna tweak as you go. It's not gonna, you're gonna start to see it come together, but you're not necessarily gonna see all the gaps filled in until you get the final petals on. Okay. And I don't want it to be like square, like a 4 corners or anything like that. It was a very star-shaped, thing. I'm gonna start to fill in some of these gaps in the back. I'm just going around gently once to secure them in while I tape. Like I said, we're not done with the dust. We're still gonna come back and finish up our highlights. I don't have large ones, so I'm just gonna play with my one last large one. I don't hate it though. I had more medium-sized ones than I normally do. Okay. And it's good, all petals are different. I just had a hibiscus open the other day and it had a ridiculous number of petals I wasn't expecting. It had 5 layers of 5 petals instead of just the regular 5 petals. Okay, so that's that. I'm going to tape it down one more time. And now before I get rid of my dust, I like to look at it as a whole now for where I highlight it. So I'm going to do 2 things to highlight it. I'm going to highlight the center with some green, and I'm going to highlight the outside with some aubergine. So first, I'm going to take my aubergine and I'm just going to hit, not everywhere, but the odd section of each of the larger petals with some aubergine. Ooh, that one got heavy, that's okay. It would happen in nature. Nothing is the same twice. Okay, so I've accented. This one doesn't have anything though. That looks naked. And the nice thing when you do it all together, you can take a look at it and see where it feels like it needs something. The center, I also have made aubergine, fairly heavy aubergine actually. And when I really broke it down to what the original plant looked like, you could see on the stems down here that the aubergine came up the stems. Okay, so really deep accent in the center. Put this aside. And we're gonna take our moss green and a little bit of that high proof alcohol and a thin paintbrush. I'm gonna dip in the alcohol and dip in some color. I like to roll my brush just so I get a nice fine point. And I'm just gonna highlight the center line of each leaf with a little bit of wet color. It just makes it a little bit darker just down the center. Okay, you can pick up more color, pick up more alcohol, but always turning your brush. And I do it on these leaves too. Okay, and your leaves are on wires, so if you need to manipulate them because you want to get in further, you can always bend them back gently and then bring them back into place. Okay. Every petal. You could also, depending on the variation of your leaf, highlight with a center white line with a little bit of powdered white color. Depending on what you're doing, that would look nice. Okay. Okay, and now we're gonna glaze it. Actually, just for fun, I'm gonna try and add something to that. Mute it with a little bit. There we go. Okay, and now we're gonna glaze it. And like I said, I like the look of the high strength confectioner's glaze so that this has a super, super high shine. You can just spray it a couple times if what you have is spray glaze, but this will dry super, super shiny. You do front and back. Make sure you have some glaze thinner because I know that you can buy cheap brushes and throw them away, but I prefer to not destroy the environment. And I keep my glaze brushes separate, and then I just grab my glaze thinner, throw my brushes in my glaze thinner and let them sit. They're not going to be the same for dusting. You won't want to use them for that down the road, but they will come clean enough that you can keep using them as your glaze brushes. They don't have to go in the landfill every time. Ooh, I like the center. You know when they all come together and it gets exciting? I like the way the aubergine hit the center on this one. My last one was a little bit lighter. Okay, you can glaze the back of the leaves too, and that's gonna be your statement leaf.